Peter, the stage is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Clynes, and I'm going to be talking about my paper, which is a case study in increasing empathy towards deaf people using the role-playing game Sign, a game about being understood. First, a quick thank you to all of the organizers, everyone who's giving a presentation, and of course, the tireless interpreters. I have a lot to get through, so I'll get down to it straight away. I can't go into full detail on everything, so there's more detail in the paper, but feel free to contact me in Discord as well. So to start off, this paper actually investigates a role-playing game, how that could be used to deepen the understanding of others and just provide more accessibility outside of the game rather than increasing accessibility in a specific game. In particular, this is a live-action role-playing game about understanding deaf individuals. The participants were all hearing, and I wanted to see if the game would help them understand and empathize more with deaf individuals. So, to begin with, it's important to address the issue of whether deafness is a disability. And most hearing people would likely say yes immediately. And this makes sense as deafness meets the medical definition of a physical disability. However, many members of the deaf community do not consider themselves disabled, but rather members of a distinct linguistic group. Another point of interest is cochlear implants. So these are small implants which are placed under the skin just above the ear, and they have a magnetic external attachment. And this can interpret the vibrations of sound around the individual, bypass any damage in the auditory canals, and directly stimulate the auditory nerve. And this essentially allows deaf people to hear. Um, Again, most hearing people would assume this is a great cure for a disability and it should be used whenever possible. However, again, many in the deaf community are vehemently opposed to it, especially in the case of young children. And some have even likened it to genocide, as it's preventing deaf children from growing up in that unique deaf culture. Now, whether you agree or disagree with the definition of a disability or the morality of using cochlear implants, you can see that there is a great potential for misunderstanding between the hearing community and the deaf community. So methods to improve cross-cultural understanding there should be investigated. Um, Now, so when it comes to understanding others, particularly those with disabilities, it's important to aim for the development of empathy, not sympathy. So empathy comes from a place of understanding, while sympathy generally is more likely to invoke feelings of pity. And research shows that developing empathy is much better for improving relationships between and interactions between different groups. And people with disabilities have routinely expressed a preference for empathy over sympathy. Now, excuse me, building on that point, disability simulations are quite widespread, but they are not a panacea. In fact, disability simulations often cause more harm than good. So when you're designing a disability simulation, there are two important factors that you should consider. They should not only show the problems that people with disabilities face, but it's also important to show how those people overcome or deal with those disabilities. For example, if you're put into a wheelchair and told to make your way around town, you will likely struggle in some places. And if you're not given any advice or any practical methods that people in wheelchairs use to overcome these, you'll experience frustration and develop more of a fear of the disability, a fear of ever getting that disability. And it really provokes a lot of pity for the people with that disability. But if you are introduced to tools or methods that those people use to overcome or deal with these difficulties, it's much more likely to lead to positive outcomes and empathy. The second important factor is to include people with disabilities as much as possible. Ideally, such people should be involved in the planning, design, and implementation phases of the simulation to ensure that the representation is as accurate as possible. If people without disabilities plan a simulation, however good their intentions, it's likely to be inauthentic and it may teach incorrect lessons. So moving on to deafness in Japan. Excuse me. For most deaf students in Japan, they choose mainstreaming. This means that they will attend regular mainstream schools. And this is very widespread around the world, mainstreaming. And this has the advantage that students with disabilities are able to benefit from the best schools and the best resources, while also exposing non-disabled students to students with disabilities to help with integration, hopefully decrease discrimination and persecution in the future. That's the goal anyway. However, many deaf mainstream students in Japan actually do not consider themselves deaf, despite reaching the threshold definitions of various levels of deafness. And they are largely unaware of deaf culture, sign language, and the organizations that are petitioning on their behalf. And in Japan, the majority of the responsibility for communicative English lies with the ALT, or the assistant language teacher. The Japanese teachers generally focus on grammar translation, and the ALT will focus on communicative English. And the Japanese government employs thousands of these ALTs from abroad, mostly English-speaking countries. But as many deaf students don't consider themselves deaf, and ALTs are largely unfamiliar with the intricacies of Japanese education, it's likely that the ALTs are unaware of the additional needs that these deaf students have. And as a result, deaf students are likely to be denied quality education in English communication. However, potentially small changes in aspects such as gaze, eye contact, posture may help those students feel more included in the lesson and benefit from the education. So moving on to the game, this game is based on the experiences of deaf children in Nicaragua. This is a fascinating topic. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend looking into it, where, excuse me, in the 1970s and 1980s, deaf children gathered together at a school for the deaf and developed their own sign language. And this has been researched a lot because it's a rare example of the birth of a modern birth of a new language. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into it in more detail right now, but this game was developed in close cooperation with the Nicaraguan Deaf Project. It included many site visits to the Nicaraguan School for the Deaf and had interviews with deaf individuals. And it is also shaped by the feedback from deaf playtesters. And there is a final comment in the debriefing to be read aloud to all participants. That's feedback from real deaf playtesters as well. So players in this game take on the role of deaf students in Nicaragua and play the game across classroom settings and recess settings. One player will also take on the role of the teacher or the facilitator. There are 4 classroom sessions and 3 recesses, which alternate. At the start of each session, players are given written cards, which explain what they have to do in the next session. Before the game begins, there's a short introduction, read aloud, followed by a few simple warm-ups, and each player receives a character card representing the student they will roleplay as. This student card comes with background, history, descriptive adjectives, and a truth, something important to the character. For example, for a deaf student, I want to have a real conversation with my hearing father. The card also has relationship goals to give you motivation for interacting with other students in the game. After this point, unless there are any questions, there's no more verbal communication and you can't use established sign language. So now we go on to the classroom sessions. Students will create signs for their own names, which the other students will repeat. So for example, this could be the sign that I choose for my name. After that, students will also get to define words from a set list. So lists will be put in front of the students. They can choose a card that they will define a symbol for. So for example, this may be a symbol for family. Of course, it's completely free. And in the final class, students are given a blank card and they can create a sign for any word they want, ideally a word that they had trouble communicating before. In the recess sessions, the students are free to interact in any way that they want, but non-verbally. In this way, classroom sessions help build up a shared vocabulary together while the real communication happens during the recess. And later classroom sessions allow students to define words to help them communicate more during recess. And the final class is quite different from the previous classes in that each student will take a turn being in the spotlight. That's not super important right now. So anyway, for this research, is that just sorry, just before that. After that, this is the end of the role play, and speaking is allowed once more, and the facilitator will run a debrief. The debrief questions are provided in the game as well. And finally, as I mentioned before, there are a few read aloud notices, comments on from deaf playtesters that they think it's important for the players to understand after playing. So for this study, 4 ALTs or assistant language teachers with different level of teaching experience in Japan were selected. I collected pre and post intervention responses, and this involved open-ended questions and an empathy scale questionnaire. The debriefing session was also transcribed, and I did thematic analysis of all of the qualitative data. The entire game took about 4 hours with 30 minutes for the introduction, the setup and the warm-up, about 2.5 hours of playtime and 1 hour debriefing. So what did we find out? The thematic analysis revealed kind of 3 key points: an increased empathy for and awareness of the deaf, the communication challenges that they were presented with, and some game mechanic issues as well. For increased empathy with the deaf, one participant noted it was fun at the points we didn't understand each other, but if this was our real life, it would probably be way more frustrating and tiring. However, another participant highlighted both the initial frustration, but also the satisfaction when communication was successful. So there was a lot of stress, but the enjoyment of being able to express what I mean to others and having other people understand me, it felt good that I could tell what I wanted. So this shows that the game does provide support for overcoming the challenges that the game presents. Another key aspect was the importance of visual clues. So participants learned or one participant mentioned they were listening or I guess watching another participant. They briefly looked down at their card, only to find that they had completely lost the thread of the conversation. And this highlighted the need to pay attention throughout and the difficulty that multitasking might present. For communication challenges, participants initially took to the game by miming and gesturing, and then additional support in the classroom sessions gave them more ability to communicate. However, participants noted difficulty expressing complex concepts such as time, past and future tenses, and causality. And equally, some concepts which might be considered simple created surprising difficulty, with one participant noticing difficulty in differentiating words like what or why, similar gestures we would use. One key concept was not the difficulty in making yourself understood, but rather knowing if the other person had understood you. So several of these misunderstandings only came to light during the debriefing session when we were allowed to talk again. During the gameplay, participants thought they had been understood, only to find out that what they intended to express had been interpreted differently by others. And the complexity of the game kind of decreased from the start right down to the final recess, but then the final classroom session seemed to be the most difficult for students. Moving on to gameplay then, game mechanics. The main difficulty that the students or that the participants mentioned was that the game mechanics was using the pre-generated characters. They said it was difficult to both role play being deaf, but also role playing as their specific characters. And in particular, some of the adjectives used to describe the characters are difficult to role play. Particularly for those participants with limited LARPing experience. Adjectives such as thorny, quirky, and sly were difficult to roleplay. But despite all these difficulties, all of the participants expressed positive reactions to the game as fun and beneficial about understanding the deaf experience. So briefly, I understand I'm running out of time here, but basically, this game does seem to have been effective at raising awareness about the deaf experience, even if it's not the modern deaf experience. And the participants all reported feeling higher levels of understanding and empathy towards the deaf. And all of this was done with participants who have very limited or none or no, experience with role playing and very little conscious interaction with deaf individuals as well. So this provides a good basis for recommending this simulation as an effective way to improve understanding of and empathy for the deaf community. There are some ways that it could be improved. The characters are quite complex, and it is possible that role playing as these characters can cause a distraction from the main communication goal of the simulation. In particular, the difficult adjectives are a hurdle. However, these characters are also based to some extent on some of the original students in Nicaragua. So, thus, removing them completely might pose some ethical questions. So, simplifying those might be the best answer. But one key aspect, and the main thing I want you to take away from this, is that the simulation presented participants with challenges that deaf individuals may have faced, but also provided methods for them to overcome such difficulties. This is likely due to the fact that the game was developed in close collaboration with many deaf individuals and deaf organizations. And this is a really key part of successful, effective disability simulation, and it supports the use of this simulation in future research and applications. I would love to discuss this further, but I feel like I've already run out of time. I'm sorry. As a final word, I would like to recommend checking out this game, Sign, a game about being understood, on the Thorny Games website. The digital version of the game is completely free, but if you wanted to buy the physical game, all of the proceeds from the game go directly to the Nicaraguan Sign Language Project, charity based on that. If you have any questions, please talk to me on Discord. You can contact me here. And if you're ever in Fukui, let me know. We'll hang out, we'll play games. We have dinosaurs. That's everything for today. So hopefully, without having gone too far over time, I'll hand back to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we maybe have like 45 seconds for a quick question if someone wants to ask something or comment something, but please feel free to write to Peter
Yes.
on Discord. Okay, and the link he just shared is also in his article. So if you download it there, or you can share it also on Discord
I'll do that.
again. So yeah, thank you very much. I don't see a raised hand. So yeah, thank you very much, Peter.